Father, we've heard about prayer, we've practiced prayer, now we're asking to practice the presence of God. Would you respond to our prayers and show your face? And may we be changed. Amen. I promise these ladies I won't look at them during the Bible study at all. But you do notice they've come to the front row. You probably also noticed over the last couple of days, if you don't come to the front row, I will come to where you are. No matter where you're sitting in the room, I'm coming after you. Angie and I spent 2010 to 2015 in eastern Canada, New Brunswick to be precise. And if you don't know where New Brunswick is, because most Canadian or most Americans don't have any idea of Canadian geography, go up to northern Maine and hang a right. Most Americans think, isn't that the Atlantic Ocean? No, that is New Brunswick. I tried to get a couple pictures up. I couldn't get them on my laptop. They're on my phone. Of what it was like in January of 2015. We had counted 16 feet of snow. And it never melted. It just kept piling up, piling up. So I have a picture of Angie on our sidewalk where she's walking and the snow is up above her head. And so one day I asked her this question: would you like to go to Florida? I think she really at that point wanted to hear my voice more than Jesus. Yes, I would like to go to Florida. And so the West End Church had a conference down there in mid-January. So the week before, we went down, we spent one day at Disney World, and we drove over to Port Canaveral, hopped on a boat, and began traversing through some of the islands of the Caribbean, whichever it is. And we went to an island called Cozumel. I don't know if you've been there, but it's wonderful. And we were getting ready to get off the boat. And if you notice, in the evenings, there are people in your room while you're at dinner, and they usually make little animals out of towels and put them on your bed. And they're also there in the morning when you go to breakfast. They're going through your stuff. I don't know what they're doing. They left on there a map of Cozumel so you could know where you're going. Now, Angie and I have this wonderful symbiotic relationship in our marriage. There are things that she is great at that I'm terrible at, and things that I'm great at she's terrible at. I am great with directions. I know north, south, east, and west. If we walk out of this room, Angie is always walking behind me, not because she's being subservient, but because she's not sure if she turns right or left. She's going to follow. So I looked at that map, and all I have to do is look at a map, know which direction is north, and I don't get lost. So I had that map, I looked at it, I left it in the room. I knew I wouldn't need it. We were disembarking from the boat. We walked past one of the steward's carts that's there, and I just happened to see the map, and there was something inside me that said, just go ahead and take it, just in case. I knew I wouldn't need it, but I did. I just picked it up and folded it and put it in my pocket, and we went on. We were going through the town, and as we got to the center part of the city, Angie was asking to go to a specific restaurant. So I knew exactly where it was. I knew all I had to do was go down the road and turn to the left, and we'd be there. So I took out the map just to double check. Yep, we go down here, turn to the left, and we'll be there. So we went down, turned to the left. It wasn't there. Angie's world was shaking. So I was lost. So I took the map out again. Oh, I see the problem. We should have turned right. So we backtracked and turned to the right. It wasn't there either. I'm thinking, what's going on? Till I began looking at the map. The map looked absolutely identical to the one that was in the room. The one in the room at the very top said Cozumel. The one I was looking at actually said San Juan, Puerto Rico. So I felt better, though stupid. I felt better that I wasn't lost. I tell you that story? Because very often the spiritual map we're using is ours. It's the one that's embedded in our head. It is our human way of perceiving the world. And today I'm going to show you God's way of perceiving the world. And they are so far apart that if we actually use our map, internal map, we will always end up at the wrong place at the wrong time. And we'll keep asking the questions, God, what's wrong with you? It's not his problem. We often perceive the kingdom as being the world upside down. Could I correct your theology? The kingdom is the world right side up, and we just need to align ourselves to kingdom principles, and all of a sudden, life will look much more in tune with the will of God. So can I just ask you to do something very simple this morning? I want you to agree with God with his perception to the way the world looks. I mean, would you agree with that first? Because I'm going to tell you something that you're going to see and you're going to go, I don't particularly like that. And as I said a couple days ago, I don't care whether you like it or not. I want you to know whether or not, before you hear it, you will already agree to align yourself with the mind of God. Fair enough? Is that a fair question? So, will you say yes to God before you even know what his will is? Is it going to be easy? It's going to be very hard. And he does ask, don't forget, now this is the Gospel of John, not Mark. It is the other gospel. In John, he says these words, unless you eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, you will have no part. Unless you have communion with Jesus himself and his will, you'll have no part of it. And says this, many of his disciples left him because his teaching, his words were hard. I promise you, his words this morning will be hard, but you will taste and you will know what the Lord is doing. So Bob, pray again. Help us in our hearts to say yes, even before we know what your will is. We talked yesterday. Ron was asking me a question. Are you actually going to try to cover verses 8 and 9 of chapter 1 today? No, that would take too long, so we're going to skip that. But if I'm studying the Gospel of Mark, I'm beginning with this question. What is the precise nature of the introduction to Mark's Gospel in chapter 1, verses 1 through 13? What is the precise nature of it? And how does the rest of the book unpack that introduction? Because if you notice, you were introduced to all the main characters in the book. John the Baptist, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and the Father, and Satan. Those are the main characters in the book. Now, of course, there's a lot of disciples that come and go, but the issue is they're never the main characters. And I'm going to make this argument to you when we talk about chapter 9. The main character is only Jesus. If anybody else ever tries to supplant him as being the main character in the book, wrong step. Jesus is in every single passage of this book with only one exception. Only one. That's the empty tomb. He ain't there. Every other place, he's the main character in every single story. So what is the precise nature of these introductory verses, and then how does the rest of the book unpack it? So you never read anything else without the introduction in mind. Great first question. Second one, this is the one we're going to be talking about today. What is the precise meaning of this pivot, this shift from the first half of the book to the second half? And how does that then play out in terms of the way we understand the book? If you take this passage out of the Gospel of Mark, I would argue the book doesn't make sense. There is this shift right here, and when you unpack chapters 8 and 9, now I've only got 8 here, but I really think 8 and 9 are the two key passages that make sense of the second half of the book. In 2009, I went on sabbatical from Indiana Wesleyan, and I called Wesleyan headquarters to the mission department and said, if you have me for 6 months, where would you send me? And he said, we'd send you to Africa. What would I do? You would teach our district superintendents. What would I teach them? Whatever they want. Okay? So I arrived in Johannesburg, South Africa, was picked up at the airport by a man by the name of Dr. Galera. No, seriously, his first name is Doctor. If I knew it was that easy to get a doctorate, that's what I would have done. And so I asked him, I mean, that evening, seriously, that evening, I'm getting ready to speak to 13 district superintendents. What am I teaching on? Here is their subject. The health and wealth gospel is taking over Southern Africa, and we have no answer for it. And this morning, I'm going to give you the answer that I gave to them. So, that's how this passage plays such an important role. I'm going to skip past some of this, you've already seen this. This we'll talk about tomorrow, what I call the climax of the gospel, and how does Mark differ from Matthew and Luke and John. And dramatically, they're all very different. Even though they tell the same story about the same person, each one has a different climax. And if you wanted to, if you were really looking at Mark in terms of a journey narrative, which is really what it is, here is the way it would work down into the journey. These first 8 chapters are about Jesus in Galilee. Chapter 8 through 10 is really Jesus on his way, on the way to Jerusalem. And then chapter 11 through 16 is Jesus in Jerusalem. This is his goal. How do I get these disciples, not just to a place, but how do I transform them on the journey to Jerusalem? So this is really kind of a, if you will, this is 3 years with Jesus. And if you think about it, this is 1 week with Jesus. Some scholars, and I vehemently disagree with them, but some scholars actually say that the Gospel of Mark is the crucifixion of Jesus with a long introduction. That so trivializes the teaching of Jesus that it's a bad way of reading it. But that's the way some do. So, I went to a church in Chillicothe and preached several weeks ago. And the media arts team called me up and said, what are the PowerPoints that you're going to put up? I need to know how to put that together for the service. And I said, nothing but text. So this morning, this is what we're going to do. We're going to walk through the Gospel of Mark. And I promise you right now, you're not going to like this. So take it up with Jesus. It's primarily his words, housed in the Gospel of Mark. And Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi is a northern area of what now we talk about in terms of Syria, Jordan and Syria. But Caesarea Philippi is the farthest Jesus has ever been away from Jerusalem his entire life. Jesus never traveled very much at all. He's about 70 miles from Jerusalem. He's as far away as he can go. Total pagan territory. Caesarea Philippi is a Roman city that was dedicated to the god Pan. And then the name was changed to actually King Philip. Caesarea Philippi to be named after Alexander the Great's father, King Philip. Did you catch the word? On the way. This is not on the road. On the direction that Jesus has laid out for the disciples, as he has discovered by being in total submission to the Father. That's the way. Very often, we are on our way and ask God to bless it. Could I ask you to back up from using that map and say, Jesus, what is the way you want for me? Instead of me asking you to bless my life, I want you to be going somewhere. How about if I put it this way? When I was young and had a body that could actually do more things than it can do now, I used to be a long-distance bicyclist. I don't mean motorcyclist, I mean bicyclist. If I say this term to you, a century, have you heard of the term century with a bicyclist? What's a century?
100 miles.
Yeah, riding 100 miles a day, which you might say, how stupid. Yeah, it really is. But it's a challenge. I used to ride centuries. And you can never ride centuries by yourself. It's just too exhausting. Because what you can't do is always be the lead bike all the time. You have to ride with a team, often 2 or 3. One person will go out in front and pedal as fast as they can. And the other people following, their job is to put their front wheel as close to the back wheel of the person in front of them. And you just simply are carried along. Jesus always rides the lead bike. And your job is to put your front tire as close to his rear tire as you can. And every once in a while you can pop out and see where you're going. And very often you go, oh man, I don't want to go there. And Jesus says, get behind me. You're going to hear that word in a minute. Get behind me. And you get behind him, you have no problem. Our problem is we actually want to go around Jesus and get ahead of him. And then sometimes we turn around and realize he's not behind me. He made a different turn. Have you ever been there? Could I give you a good word? This is kind of Angie's counseling technique. Stop doing that! On the way, on Jesus' way, on the Father's way, not your way, he asked them, who do people say that I am? It's kind of a great, safe first question. Jesus always uses what's called the Socratic method of education. He asks questions, and your answer reveals so much, not just to him, but it's self-awareness. Sometimes you say something out loud, did I really say that? Because that sounded horribly judgmental. I didn't mean it, but yeah, you did. It was in there. It's what came out. So who do people say that I am? And they replied. They replied. Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets. Those are, you say that about me? John the Baptist, that's pretty good company. Some say Elijah, that's not bad at all. Some say one of the prophets, not just one of the prophets, but Deuteronomy 18, Moses tells us that in those later days a prophet will become that's even greater than Moses. This is pretty good company to be in. Unless, of course, you're the son of God. And it's quite a demotion. But it's even worse than that. If we had time, and we don't, but if we had time, I'd take you back to Mark chapter 6, where a man by the name of King Herod actually makes this statement. When he's talking about who Jesus is, he goes, maybe he's John the Baptist come back from the dead. Maybe he's Elijah. Maybe he's one of the prophets. What do the people sound like? They sound just like King Herod. That's why I made a statement to you the other day to kind of prepare you for this. You have to make a choice as to whether you're going to follow the script of culture or the scripture of the kingdom. And I know you might say, well, I'm more like Jesus than I am like the culture. I don't want you to be anything like the culture. I want you to be everything like Jesus. It's not an amalgamation. It's not a mixture. You actually need to reject and accept. Say no and say yes, even before you know what you're agreeing to. Because the comment I made to you yesterday about the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, this is a statement of who Jesus is. Jesus is actually a counter Caesar, a counter emperor, a counter-cultural person. And if you say no to the emperor and yes to Jesus, it's very likely a death sentence you're declaring to yourself. I told you this would be tough. You must die to this, to be made alive to this. You got to be careful what you teach or preach, because at times your helpmate is going to remind you of what you just said. So this spring I was preaching before the beginning of Holy Week, and I made a comment while I was preaching. You all do this. The average household in North America has the TV on for 6.5 hours a day. Now, if yours is on less, you know other people have it on more. That's the voice that's going to influence your mind, your heart, your kids, your grandkids. 6.5 hours a day. Do we give God, Jesus, and the Word equal billing? No. So I asked the church, would you please fast TV during Holy Week and replace it with, this is an exercise I gave to you on Tuesday, just listen to the Word. Just put it on your CD or have it read to you. Just listen to the Word versus listening to the world. And I said that. There was 3 services I was preaching back to back to back. And after the first service, Angie came up to me, of course, got right into my face, and she goes, "Does that go for you too?" I have to admit to you, I've never heard God speak more profoundly or more clearly than I did during Holy Week. The house was silent, just God and us. You have to make sure you understand how the culture does impact and influence you and shape the way you think, and reject it. And find out how Jesus wants to shape the way you think and receive it. And don't fool yourself and think you're the only person not being impacted by the culture. Don't fool yourself. That's lying to yourself. Reject Caesar and accept Jesus. But, don't you love the buts? But what about you, he asked. Who do you say I am? Now, that's a great question. Who always answers when Jesus asks the question? Peter. Whether he knows what he's talking about or not. And don't forget, the early church tells us that the Gospel of Mark is actually the sermons of Peter written down by him. This is Peter telling himself at his worst. What we're about to read is Peter's self-testimony about this event. So Peter said, "You are the Messiah." Some of your translations may say, "You are the Christ." So I'm a professor. I get to give tests. How many of you would say that Peter is right? Put your hand up. How many of you say he is wrong? Put your hand up. How many of you are terrified of being He is both right and wrong. He has the right term, but the wrong definition of that term. And Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. You need to put these 2 verses in context. He has just said he's the Messiah, and Jesus just said, if you will, in a sanctified way, shut up.
Is that the same reason he tells all of the demon-possessed men and everything? Because
Don't
they
tell
had
anyone
they
about
had the incorrect definition.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay,
He also doesn't like us well either.
right. I mean, there are a lot of secondary and tertiary motives, but listen carefully to this. William Temple, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury back in the 1850s, said this: if your understanding of Jesus is wrong, the more religious you become, the more dangerous you are to yourself and to others. Yeah, that should get some. It should get some. You got to go to Bible college. Because I think my understanding is wrong. No. It's not that it's wrong. It's just at times culturally immersed. I want you to say no to what the culture says and yes to what the Bible says. You are the Messiah. Now, I wish I had an hour just to explain what this term means to Peter. Remember my statement to you the other day? I don't care what you think. I want to know what the scriptures are talking about. The term Messiah is used fairly sparingly in the Old Testament. It is not a key term of the whole Old Testament. It is used a few times. You might be surprised to find out that actually a man by the name of King Cyrus, a pagan king, actually is called an anointed one, a Messiah, because Cyrus is the one that actually sends the Israelites back to Jerusalem. He's called a Mashiach, a Messiah. Oh. A Messiah is one who has a mission given to him by God. In Peter's day, Peter had a clear assumption that God was going to send a Messiah. And the Messiah, now hear me carefully, the Messiah is always a human being, a man. Ladies, I'd like to tell you that there was an option for a Messiah to be a woman. I just can't tell you that. It was a man that was going to do probably two roles. It's very hard to tell precisely, but probably two. One is to restore the throne of David to Jerusalem, number one. And number two, to cast out the enemies from the land that has polluted it. And in our case, who would that be? Rome. This is what you're going to do, Jesus. Why? Because Peter has watched Jesus from the time that he was called as he was a fisherman. The very first thing that Jesus does is to do an exorcism. And then after that, there is miracle after miracle after miracle. How many of you actually read the first 8 chapters of Mark in one sitting? Were you amazed at the number of miracles that were done? The first 8 chapters of Mark is nothing but miracles. Peter's seen that. I've seen you stand on the bow of a boat and stop the winds and the waves. I have seen you cast out a legion of demons, throw them into pigs, and then have them drown themselves. I have seen you turn fish and loaves into enough food to feed 5,000 the first time, 4,000 the second time, have enough left over, and to have everybody declare, and they all ate and were satisfied. I've seen that. You are a miracle worker. You can do this. And Jesus says, if that's the only standard, or the only understanding you have of the kingdom of God, shut up. Now, he begins to teach. In the Gospel of Mark, I think I mentioned this to you the other day, the most common term given to Jesus is rabbi, teacher. However, he doesn't teach verbally all that much. He talks less in the Gospel of Mark than any of the other 3 Gospels. He teaches by his life as a model. But when he does teach, listen. And he began to teach them not the Messiah, but the Son of Man will suffer things, will be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and will be killed. This is the first time, friends, that this has been mentioned by Jesus. Our problem is we're so familiar with the story, we think Jesus talks about this all the time. This is the first time he's mentioned it. They've seen miracle, 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 and then Jesus goes, oh, I'm dying. He spoke plainly about this. Again, if I had time, I'd take you to chapter 4, where Jesus tells the parables of the soil. And then he tells all these parables back to back to back. And it says very clearly at the end of chapter 4, he spoke to them only in parables. And now, for the first time, it says he spoke plainly about this. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. This is New Camp rules. Sorry, Bruce, sorry, Rama, I am usurping your authority. I'm setting up a new camp rule. If you have plans during camp to rebuke Jesus, give us all a warning so we can take a couple of giant steps away from you. Fair enough? Is that a good camp policy? Any verbal rebuking of Jesus demands prior notice. The word rebuke is the precise word that Jesus uses, and Peter's heard him use this, the precise word that Jesus uses when he casts out demons. He rebukes them, and they are cast out. Peter is so vehemently in a disagreement with the agenda of Jesus, he has the audacity, and to use the word that Hubert was talking about earlier, he's using this as an authority to shut up Jesus. Again, I mentioned to you the other day, you don't want to be associated with Peter. Peter is telling you, these are his words. This is what I said to Jesus. I was so against his agenda. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, now, hear me carefully, this is not just Peter's agenda. The other disciples are in complete agreement with Peter. We want our enemies not just judged, I'd like to watch them suffer first, and then be destroyed, and then our land would be clean. Peter not realizing he is in as much disagreement with Jesus as the Romans are. So Jesus turns to the other disciples, and then he rebuked Peter, and he said this, "Get behind me." Do you think this is just hyperbole? Jesus is